Let's finish off our repository with just enough code to make it do something interesting. So I went to implement find all, which is very simple. I just need to return _set. Because _set as a DB set of t implements iQueryable of t, and once I return that, I can continue to use some link operators to query the database. Now back here in my program, let's see if we can make some of these things happen. The first thing I'm going to do is use a class database from the system.data.entity namespace to tell the entity framework that it is okay to drop and recreate the database every time this application runs. That's just going to make things simple. And again, this isn't a course on the entity framework, but what the entity framework should be doing here inside of Visual Studio 2013 is creating that database on SQL Server Express, the local DB instance. And if it already exists, it will drop and recreate it. Now let's see if I can create a repository. I want an iRepository of employee so that I can add and query employees in the database. I'll call that the employee repository. And I'll create it by constructing the concrete type SQL repository, a SQL repository of employee. And you might remember that a SQL repository needs a DB context instance. So I will create an instance of that employee DB context, the one that has a DB set for employee. That will give the entity framework enough information to create the proper database schema for me. And because this object is disposable, I'll wrap this in a using clause. And now let's see if we can use that repository. I want to first add some employees to the database, so I want to create a method called addEmployees that will do that. I also want to see if those employees made it into the database, so perhaps I could count the number of employees that are in the database. And now let me use Visual Studio to create those methods. So control period, addEmployees, control period, count employees. How do we count employees using the employee repository? Very easy. I'll write this out. I can just say employee repository, please find all the employees, and just give me a count of the number of objects that you find. And for addEmployees, I can tell the repository to please add a new employee with a name equal to Scott. Copy that line of code. We'll also create an employee with the name of Chris. And then we need to tell the repository to commit those changes to the database. Let's give this a run and see if it works, and then we'll be able to move on and talk about constraints in depth. And it looks like the program executes. I get out the value 2. That must mean that I was successful in creating a database, inserting 2 objects, and then being able to read them back out. So our abstraction is working. Now let's dig into some of the interesting things that we can do with it.